The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 17 ancient species sat in their great circular chamber, making laws and deciding the fate of billions. They controlled trade routes, technology, and military power across 1,000 star systems. To them, order meant control, and control meant survival. Humanity had joined this council only 60 years ago. They were the youngest species, still learning how things worked among the stars. The elder races looked at humans the way adults look at children who have wandered into an important meeting. They tolerated them. They made them follow strict rules. They reminded them, again and again, that they were newcomers who should be grateful for the privilege of existing in civilized space. Most humans accepted this treatment. They smiled and nodded and followed the rules. They believed that if they were patient, if they proved themselves worthy, the other species would eventually accept them as equals. Lily Morrison was 7 years old and knew nothing about galactic politics. She lived on her father's transport ship, a small vessel that carried messages and documents between Earth's colonies. Her father, Samuel Morrison, was a diplomatic courier. He was a quiet man with kind eyes who always made time to tell his daughter bedtime stories about the strange and wonderful aliens they might meet someday. Her mother, Claire, was a scientist who studied plants from different worlds. She would show Lily pictures of flowers that glowed in the dark, trees that could walk, and vines that sang when the wind touched them. Lily loved these pictures more than anything. She would spend hours drawing her own versions, imagining herself standing in gardens filled with alien wonders. On the day everything changed, their ship was traveling through a region of space controlled by the Valari. The Valari were one of the oldest species in the Council. Their bodies were made of living crystal that caught the light and turned it into rainbows. They communicated through music, their voices creating harmonies that other species found hauntingly beautiful. But beauty and kindness are not the same thing. The Valari had grown proud over thousands of years of power. They looked at other species as lesser beings, creatures to be managed rather than respected. And they had no patience for what they saw as human carelessness. Samuel Morrison had followed every protocol. His ship's identification was broadcasting correctly. His route had been approved by the proper authorities. He had done everything right. It did not matter. The Valari patrol ships appeared without warning. There were 3 of them, their crystalline hulls glittering against the darkness of space. They did not send a message asking for identification. They did not demand that the human ship stop for inspection. They simply decided that a human vessel in their space was an insult that required punishment. The first shot tore through the ship's engine compartment. Samuel Morrison barely had time to send a distress signal before the second shot destroyed their navigation systems. Claire grabbed Lily and pulled her toward the escape pod, but the third shot hit before they could reach it. What the Valari commanders did not know was that human communication technology was different from what the Council used. When Samuel sent his distress signal, it did not go through Council relay stations. It went directly to Earth through quantum-linked transmitters that worked instantly. Across any distance, millions of people across human, space watched the attack in real time. They saw the small transport ship shudder under the assault. They heard Samuel Morrison's voice, calm despite everything, reporting what was happening and requesting assistance. They heard Claire Morrison crying as she held her daughter, and they saw Lily. The little girl's face appeared on screens across Earth and every human colony. Tears ran down her cheeks. Her voice was small and confused as she looked at the camera and asked a question that would echo through history. "Mommy, why are the pretty crystal ships hurting us?" The transmission continued for another 47 seconds. People watched as the ship broke apart around the Morrison family. They heard Claire's final words, telling Lily that she loved her. They heard Samuel's last transmission, simply stating their names and requesting that someone tell their families what had happened. Then there was silence. The Valari patrol ships broadcast their own message to Council networks. They announced that they had intercepted and destroyed a human vessel that had violated their territory. They presented this as a routine matter, a simple enforcement of boundaries. They expected praise for their vigilance. They received something very different on Earth. In a tall building in the city of Chicago, a man named Daniel Carter sat alone in his office. He was 53 years old, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. He had spent his career protecting humanity. First as a soldier, then as a strategist, and now as Secretary of Human Security. He had watched the entire transmission. He had seen Lily Morrison's face. He had heard her question. For a long moment, he did not move. The screen in front of him showed only static now, the ghost of a signal that would never return. His hands rested flat on his desk, perfectly still. Then he reached for his secure communication device. It connected to people and places that officially did not exist. Facilities hidden on moons and asteroids, and in the dark spaces between stars. For 60 years, humanity had been building something in secret, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. That day had arrived. Daniel Carter spoke 4 words into the device. His voice was steady, almost gentle, carrying no trace of the fury burning inside him. Wake up the Archons. Across human space, lights began to turn on in places that had been dark for decades. Machines that had waited in patient silence began to stir. Men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment received the call they had always expected, but never wanted. The Council thought they knew what humanity was. They thought they understood the young species that smiled and followed rules and accepted their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Lily Morrison had wanted to see alien flowers. She had dreamed of standing on strange worlds and discovering wonders that no human had seen before. She had been innocent and hopeful and full of love for a universe. She was only beginning to explore. The Valari had taken that future from her. They had killed a child and called it policy. They had murdered a family and called it enforcement. Now they would learn what humanity did to those who hurt their children. The stars themselves would remember what came next. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was a marvel of ancient engineering. It floated in space, a massive sphere where representatives of 17 species gathered to govern the galaxy. Light filtered through crystal walls, casting rainbow patterns across the circular floor where each delegation sat in their designated place. Patricia Vance stood in the center of this chamber, feeling the weight of 100 alien eyes upon her. She was 62 years old, a diplomat who had spent 3 decades learning how to navigate the complex politics of species, who had been traveling between stars while humanity was still living in caves. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her face showed nothing of what she felt inside. The Valari delegation sat in the highest position, their crystalline bodies catching the light and filling their section of the chamber with dancing colors. High Coordinator Zethrel was their leader, an ancient being whose crystal form had grown more complex and beautiful over thousands of years. His voice created harmonies that most species found pleasant, even hypnotic. Today, those harmonies carried contempt. Zethrel spoke first. Ass was the privilege of the eldest species. He explained that a human vessel had entered sacred Valari territory without authorization. The patrol ships had responded according to established protocols. The destruction of the vessel was regrettable but necessary. The matter was simple and required no further discussion. Patricia listened without expression. She had known this would be their position. She had known before she even entered the chamber that justice would not be found here. When she was given permission to respond, she spoke clearly and without emotion. She stated that the Morrison vessel had proper authorization. She presented the documentation proving their approved route. She showed evidence that the ship had been broadcasting correct identification signals. She displayed the final transmission. Letting the chamber hear Lily's Morrison's voice, asking why the pretty crystal ships were hurting them. Several species shifted uncomfortably. The Moroth, ancient beings who lived in vast water-filled vessels, made sounds of distress through their translation devices. The Kethrian sectoid creatures known for their cold logic remained perfectly still, their compound eyes reflecting the images on the display. but the Valari did not move. Zethral's harmonies remained steady, dismissive. He stated that human documentation was clearly falsified. The patrol commanders had acted correctly. If humans could not control their vessels, that was not a Valari concern. Patricia Vance requested a formal investigation. She asked that the patrol commanders be questioned. She proposed that neutral parties examine the evidence from both sides. The council voted 14 species sided with the Valari. They had trade agreements to protect. They had alliances to maintain. They had their own territories that bordered human space. And they did not want to set a precedent that might complicate their own patrol activities. 2 species abstained. The Kethri stated that they required more data before forming a conclusion. The Greneth, massive stone-like beings who rarely spoke at all, simply did not respond when their vote was called. Only the Morith voted in humanity's favor. Their representative, a being whose name translated roughly as one who sees deep waters, spoke sorrowfully about the importance of protecting innocent life. Regardless of which species that life belonged to, the motion for investigation was denied. 14-1, with 2 abstentions. The matter was officially closed. Patricia Vance nodded slowly. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegation in turn. Some looked away. Others stared back with indifference or hostility. The Valari simply glowed with satisfaction. She announced that humanity would be withdrawing from all cooperative agreements with the Council, effective immediately. Trade treaties, research partnerships, military coordination, diplomatic protocols. All of it. Everything. Humanity was done pretending to be part of a community. It did not value human lives. The chamber erupted in noise. Several species demanded clarification. Others laughed, their translation devices converting their amusement into sounds that humans could understand. The Valari's harmonies became sharp and mocking. One representative asked what humanity thought they could possibly do. They were the youngest species. They had the smallest fleet. They had accepted technology restrictions that limited their development. Did they truly believe they could survive outside the Council's protection? Patricia Vance smiled. It was not a warm expression. She stated that the Council would understand soon enough. Then she turned and walked out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Back on Earth. The Archon Protocol was already in its 3rd day. For 60 years, humanity had played a role. They had acted like obedient newcomers, accepting limitations on their ships, their weapons, their research. They had let the Council believe that human technology was generations behind the elder species. It was all a lie. During humanity's first expansion into space, before they ever made contact with the Council, explorers had found something extraordinary. On a dead moon orbiting a burned-out star, they discovered the remains of a civilization that made the Council's elder species look like infants. The Builders, as humanity called them, had existed millions of years ago. They had achieved things that current science said were impossible. They had manipulated space and time and dimensions that humans were only beginning to understand. And they had left behind technology that still worked, waiting for someone to find it. Humanity had spent 6 decades studying these discoveries. They had built secret facilities on hidden moons and in asteroid belts and in the deep spaces between stars. They had trained scientists and engineers and soldiers for a conflict they hoped would never come. The Council knew nothing about any of this. Now, those hidden facilities were coming to life. Machines powered by energy sources that defied known physics began their startup sequences. Vessels that existed partially outside normal space-time prepared to emerge from their hiding places. Weapons that could unmake matter at the atomic level completed their final calibrations. Daniel Carter stood in a command center buried deep beneath the surface of Mars. Screens surrounded him, showing status reports from 100 secret installations. Men and women worked at their stations with quiet efficiency, executing plans they had rehearsed countless times. A young officer named Kevin Park approached with a tablet showing fleet readiness. Everything was proceeding on schedule. The Archons would be fully operational within 4 days. Daniel nodded. He looked at the screens for a long moment, then at a small photograph he kept in his pocket. It showed his own daughter, now grown with children of her own. She had been about Lily Morrison's age when he had first seen the builder technology and understood what it meant. He had hoped she would never need to know what humanity was truly capable of. That hope had died with a little girl who just wanted to see alien flowers. Humanity had been patient. They had been peaceful. They had trusted that the galaxy would eventually recognize their worth. Now, they would teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. 1 week after the Council dismissed humanity's request for justice, every communication system in the galaxy received the same transmission at the exact same moment. It did not matter if the system was Council-approved or privately owned, military-grade or civilian. The signal reached all of them simultaneously, something that should have been technically impossible. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds stopped what they were doing and watched. The transmission began with a simple image, a photograph of a little girl with brown hair and bright eyes smiling at the camera. She was holding up a drawing she had made, a picture of herself standing on an alien world surrounded by strange and beautiful flowers. The colors were bright and hopeful, the work of a child who believed the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. The image remained on screen for 30 seconds. No sound, no explanation. Just a little girl's smile and her dreams drawn in crayon. Then the picture faded, and Daniel Carter appeared. He sat at a simple desk in a room with plain walls. He wore no uniform, no symbols of rank or authority. He looked like what he was, a tired man carrying a weight that threatened to crush him. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, the voice of someone who had moved beyond anger into something colder and more terrible. He introduced himself and explained his position within humanity's government. Then he told the galaxy about Lily Morrison. She had been 7 years old. She loved drawing pictures. She wanted to explore alien worlds and see things no human had ever seen. Her parents had taught her that the universe was vast and wonderful, that different species could live together in peace. The Valari had killed her. They had destroyed her family's ship without warning, without cause, without mercy. They had murdered a child and then reported it as a routine enforcement action. Daniel paused. His eyes looked directly into the camera, and beings across the galaxy felt as though he was looking at each of them personally. Humanity had come to the stars with hope. He continued. They had wanted to learn and grow and find their place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. They had accepted their role as newcomers. They had followed the rules even when those rules seemed unfair. They had believed that if they were patient, if they proved themselves worthy, they would eventually be treated as equals. That belief was now dead. The Galactic Council had looked at the murder of a child and declared it acceptable. They had decided that human lives were worth less than Valari pride. They had sent a message that humanity's children could be killed without consequence. Humanity disagreed. The image shifted. It now showed a live feed of a Valari military installation called Station Kethfer. The station floated in space near the edge of Valari territory, a massive structure that served as a defensive platform and command center. Over 50,000 Valari personnel worked there, operating some of the most advanced weapons in the known galaxy. Daniel Carter's voice continued as the image remained. Steady on the station, he explained that humanity was not declaring war. They were not threatening violence. They were simply demonstrating a capability that the Council needed to understand. As he spoke, something appeared near the station. It was difficult to look at directly, a shape that seemed to exist partially outside normal vision. It was dark and bright at the same time, geometric, yet constantly shifting. The minds of those watching struggled to process what they were seeing. This was an Archon. The station's weapons activated instantly. Thousands of energy beams and projectiles and plasma bursts struck the Archon vessel. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The Archon did not move. It did not fire back. It simply hung in space, completely unaffected by the assault. Then it did something that would haunt the nightmares of every species that witnessed it. The Archon reached out. There was no other way to describe what happened. Something extended from the vessel. Something that existed in dimensions that normal matter could not touch. It wrapped around Station Kethver. It's like fingers closing around a toy. And then the station simply stopped existing. There was no explosion. No debris. No energy release. One moment, 50,000 beings and millions of tons of advanced technology occupied that space. The next moment, there was nothing. The station had been removed from reality itself. The image returned to Daniel. Carter's face, he stated that this was not an attack. This was a warning. The beings on that station were not dead in any traditional sense. They had been moved somewhere else, somewhere outside normal space-time. Whether they would ever return depended on decisions that would be made in the coming days. Humanity was giving the Council one standard week to meet 3 demands. First, the commanders who ordered the attack on the Morrison vessel would surrender themselves to human custody for trial. Second, the Council would pay reparations to the families of the victims, an amount that humanity would specify. Third, the Council would formally recognize that human lives held equal value to the lives of any other species, and that any future attacks on human civilians would be met with immediate and overwhelming response. If these demands were not met within 1 week, humanity would no longer consider itself bound by any restrictions. Daniel Carter leaned forward slightly. He wanted to be absolutely clear about what that meant. Humanity had capabilities that the Council could not imagine. They had weapons that made the Archon demonstration look like a child's toy. They had the ability to reach any world, any station, any ship in the galaxy. They did not want to use these capabilities. They had hoped for peace. They had believed in cooperation. They had dreamed of a galaxy where different species worked together for the benefit of all. That dream had died with Lily Morrison. Now the Council had a choice. They could give humanity justice. They could learn what humanity was truly capable of. The transmission ended with a final image. Lily Morrison's drawing of herself standing among alien flowers, with 4 words written beneath it in every language the galaxy used. The choice is yours. Across the galaxy, beings stared at their screens in silence. Some felt fear. Some felt anger. Some felt a strange new emotion they had never experienced before. The realization that the universe was not what they had always believed it to be, and on Earth. In hidden facilities and secret bases, humanity waited to see which path the galaxy would choose. The week following humanity's broadcast was the most chaotic in the history of the Galactic Council. Representatives screamed at each other across the Great Chamber. Alliances that had lasted thousands of years crumbled in hours. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united by fear, though they disagreed violently on what that fear should make them do. The Valari demanded immediate action. High Coordinator Zethral stood before the Council and declared that humanity's demonstration was obviously a trick. The disappearance of Station Kethver was some kind of illusion, a clever piece of theater designed to frighten the elder species into submission. He insisted that humanity could not possibly possess technology superior to civilizations that had been traveling between stars for millennia. Some species believed him. Their pride would not allow them to accept that the young newcomers could be more advanced than them. They told themselves that the video had been manipulated, that the station was simply hidden somewhere, that humanity was bluffing. Others were not so sure. The Morith withdrew from Council proceedings entirely. Their representative, one who sees deep waters, delivered a final statement before leaving. He spoke of patterns in the universe, of how empires that valued pride over justice always fell. He warned that the Council was about to make a mistake that could not be undone. Then the great water-filled vessels of the Morath fleet departed Council space. Heading for the distant regions where their species had originated millions of years ago, the Kethri did something they rarely did. They conducted their own investigation. Their scientists analyzed every piece of data from the broadcast. They examined energy readings from the moment of the station's disappearance. They ran simulations and calculations and probability assessments. After 3 days, they presented their findings to the Council. The results were terrifying. Humanity's technology was real. It operated on principles that Kethri science could not explain. The destruction of Station Kethver had left no residual energy signature, no quantum disturbance, no evidence that it had ever existed at all. According to everything the Kethri understood about physics, what humanity had done was impossible. Their recommendation was simple and direct. Accept humanity's terms immediately. The council did not listen. Zethral rallied. The war faction, with speeches about honor and strength and the importance of maintaining order, he reminded the other species that they had built their civilizations on the principle that elder races guided younger ones. If they surrendered to human demands, that principle would be destroyed. Every young species in the galaxy would begin to question their place. The entire structure of galactic civilization would collapse. Better to fight, he argued. Better to crush this rebellion before it spread. Better to show the galaxy that challenging the council meant destruction. 12 species agreed to contribute forces to a combined fleet. The Volari committed their entire military, over 3,000 warships armed with weapons that could crack planets. The Tereth added their drone swarms. Billions of small attack craft that could overwhelm any defense through sheer numbers. The Kolvar brought their massive carrier vessels, each one capable of deploying thousands of fighters. In total, the fleet numbered over 15,000 warships. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Commanders spoke confidently about overwhelming human defenses through sheer force of numbers. The Kethri refused to participate. Their representatives stated that logic did not support this action. They would not waste their forces in a conflict that could not be won. Several other species also declined, citing concerns about the unknown nature of human capabilities, but 12 species was enough. Zethral declared that the combined fleet would gather at the edge of human space on the final day of humanity's deadline. They would demonstrate that the council could not be threatened, could not be bullied, could not be forced to bow to an upstart species. Patricia Vance watched the preparations from Earth. She had returned home after her final appearance before the council, knowing that diplomacy had failed. Now she worked with Daniel Carter and the other leaders of humanity's response, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. On the 6th day, she sent a message to the assembled fleet. She expressed her sorrow that things had come to this point. She reminded them that humanity had not asked for conflict. They had simply asked for justice, for the recognition that their lives mattered, for the acknowledgement that murdering a child was wrong. The council had refused. She offered one final chance. If the fleet turned back, if the council agreed to negotiate in good faith, humanity would welcome the opportunity for peace. They did not want war. They did not want to demonstrate what they were capable of. But if the fleet advanced, they would have no choice. Fleet Commander Veltar responded personally. He was a decorated Valeri officer who had won dozens of engagements over centuries of service. His crystalline body was covered in the marks of honor, patterns that told the story of his victories. He told Patricia Vance that humanity had one chance to avoid destruction. They could surrender unconditionally. They could hand over the technology they had stolen, or created, or discovered. They could accept punishment for their threats against the council, or they could be erased from history. Patricia did not respond. There was nothing left to say. On the final day, the combined fleet gathered at a point in space designated as the threshold. This was the invisible line between council territory and human space, a boundary that had been established when humanity first joined galactic civilization. 15,000 warships arranged themselves in attack formation. Energy weapons powered up. Shields activated. Commanders reviewed their battle plans and assured their crews that victory was certain. After all, they outnumbered known human forces by a factor of 50. Human technology was limited. Human experience was minimal. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. Fleet Commander Veltar gave the order to advance. The fleet crossed the threshold. Sensors scanning for human defensive positions. They expected to find stations and patrol ships, and perhaps a desperate defensive line. They found nothing. For long minutes, the fleet advanced through empty space. Commanders began to relax. Perhaps humanity had recognized the hopelessness of their position. Perhaps they were hiding, hoping the fleet would give up and go home. Then the Archons appeared. They emerged from nowhere, simply existing in spaces that T had been empty moments before. Dozens of them, surrounding the fleet in a sphere of impossible geometry. Their forms hurt to look at, shapes that existed partially outside the dimensions that normal matter occupied. Veltar stared at his display screens, his crystalline body flickering with colors that showed his confusion. His sensors could not make sense of what they were seeing. The Archon vessels registered as both there and not there, solid and empty, real and impossible. He ordered his fleet to open fire. 15,000 warships unleashed everything they had. Energy beams and missiles and plasma bursts and weapons that had been developed over thousands of years of warfare. The combined firepower could have destroyed a sun. The Archons absorbed it all. They did not dodge. They did not use shields. The weapons simply vanished when they touched the Archon vessels, disappearing into dimensions that Veltar's science could not comprehend. Then the Archons responded, and Fleet Commander Veltar understood in his final moments that humanity had not been bluffing at all. The Battle of the Threshold lasted exactly 17 minutes. Historians would later debate whether it should even be called a battle. A battle implies two sides fighting, each with some chance of victory. What happened at the Threshold was something else entirely. It was erasure. It was demonstration. It was the moment when the galaxy learned that everything it believed about power and civilization and order was wrong. The Archon vessels moved through the Council fleet like shadows passing through light. They did not fire weapons in any traditional sense. They simply touched the ships they encountered, and those ships ceased to exist. There was no explosion when a vessel was taken, no debris field, no escape pods launching in desperate attempts to save crew members. The ships simply vanished, pulled into dimensions that living minds could not comprehend. One moment, a massive Valari warship would be firing every weapon it had, and the next moment, there would be nothing but empty space where it had been. Commander Veltar watched his fleet disappear around him. His crystalline body flickered with colors of fear that he had never felt in centuries of warfare. He screamed orders that no one could follow, demanded tactics that did not exist, called for weapons that could not help. The Archons did not hurry. They moved methodically through the fleet, taking ship after ship with terrible patience. They seemed to want the survivors to watch, to understand, to carry the memory of what was happening. Some commanders tried to flee. They activated their fastest thanlight drives, attempting to escape back to Council space. The Archons followed them. No matter how fast a ship ran, no matter what route it took, the impossible vessels were waiting when it emerged. There was no escape. Others tried to surrender. They broadcast messages on every frequency, begging for mercy, offering to accept any terms. The Archons did not respond. They simply continued their work. Veltar's flagship was the last vessel remaining. He stood on his command deck surrounded by officers whose crystal bodies had gone dark with terror. The screen showed empty space where 15,000 warships had been minutes before. An Archon vessel approached slowly. Veltar could see patterns on its surface now, symbols that seemed to move and shift like living things. Among them, barely visible against the darkness, was something that did not belong. A child's drawing of flowers on an alien world. Lily Morrison's last artwork. Preserved on the hull of a weapon that had destroyed an empire, Veltar managed to send one final transmission back to Council space. A single image of what he was seeing, so that the galaxy would know what had happened. Then the Archon reached his ship, and Fleet Commander Veltar joined the fleet he had led to destruction. The transmission reached the Council chamber 30 seconds later. 17 species watched as the image appeared on their screens. 15,000 warships, the greatest military force ever assembled, erased in less than 20 minutes. Not defeated, not damaged. Erased as though they had never existed at all. For a long moment, no one spoke. The chamber was silent except for the sounds of different species breathing, clicking, humming with fear. Then humanity's fleet appeared on their sensors. It was small compared to what the Council had lost. Perhaps 100 vessels of conventional design, escorting a dozen Archon ships. They were moving toward Valari space at speeds that should have been impossible. High Coordinator Zethral found his voice. He demanded that the council rallied its remaining forces. He insisted that they still outnumbered humanity. He claimed that the Archons must have limits, that they could be worn down. That victory was still possible. No one listened. Species that had allied with the Valari for thousands of years began withdrawing their support. Representatives who had voted to deny humanity justice suddenly discovered urgent reasons to be elsewhere. The coalition that had seemed so powerful days ago collapsed in minutes. The Valari stood alone. Humanity's fleet did not stop at military targets. They went directly to the Valari homeworld, a planet called Kethvalar that had been the center of Valari civilization for 40,000 years. Its cities were masterpieces of crystalline architecture. Towers and domes that caught the light of their sun and turned the entire surface into a display of rainbow colors. 8 billion Valari lived on Kethvalar. Civilians, families, children. Of their own, Daniel Carter broadcast one final message. Before the operation began, he explained that humanity took no pleasure in what was about to happen. They had wanted peace. They had begged for justice. They had offered every opportunity for the Council to choose a different path. The Council had chosen war. Now, humanity would show the galaxy what that choice meant. The population of Kethvalar was given 1 hour to evacuate. Every ship that could fly, every transport that could carry passengers, every escape pod that could reach orbit was to launch immediately. Humanity would not fire on evacuation vessels. They would allow anyone who could leave to leave. But in 1 hour, the planet would become uninhabitable. Chaos erupted across Kethvalar. Billions of Valari scrambled for any way off the surface. Ships launched in every direction, overloaded with refugees. Many did not make it. Their vessels crashed or failed or simply could not carry everyone trying to board them. When the hour ended, approximately 2 billion Valari had escaped. The remaining 6 billion were still on the surface, trapped by distance or circumstance, or simply the impossibility of evacuating a planet in 60 minutes. The Archons did not destroy Kethvalar. That would have been too quick. Instead, they did something worse. They reached into the planet's core and changed something fundamental about its structure. The crystalline formations that gave Valari their energy, that made their civilization possible, began to decay. The atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped. Within days, Kethvalar would be a frozen rock. Unable to support any life at all, the Valari Empire was over. 3 weeks later, Daniel Carter stood before the reformed Galactic Council. The chamber looked different now. The Valari section was empty, their delegations scattered among refugee camps on borrowed worlds. Several other species had also lost their seats, removed by their own populations after the disaster of the war. Daniel looked tired. He had not slept properly since the day Lily Morrison died. He suspected he never would again. He addressed the assembled representatives quietly. He told them that humanity had not wanted any of this. They had come to the stars hoping to find wisdom, beauty, and friendship. They had believed that civilization meant treating all beings with respect and dignity. The old council had taught them otherwise. Now there would be a new order. Every species would be equal. Every life would matter. Any government that murdered innocents and called it policy would face consequences. This was not negotiable. Some representatives looked angry. Others looked frightened. A few, including the Morith, who had returned to take their seat, looked almost hopeful. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It was wrinkled and stained, recovered from the wreckage of the Morrison family's ship. Lily's last drawing, the original that had been copied onto the Archon hulls. He held it up for the chamber to see. This girl had wanted to see. Alien flowers. She had dreamed of a galaxy full of wonders. She had believed that different species could live together in peace. Humanity would build that galaxy now. They would honor her memory by creating the universe she had imagined, but they would also never forget what had been done to her. And anyone who threatened human children again would learn that lesson personally. Daniel carefully placed the drawing on the podium. Lily Morrison smiled up at the assembled species. Surrounded by flowers that existed only in her, imagination. The galaxy had thought they understood humanity. They had been terribly, catastrophically wrong. And now, under the watchful presence of Archon vessels that patrolled the spaces between stars, they would learn to be better. Or they would learn nothing at all. The choice, as it had always been, was theirs.